Good morning, everybody. I'm just going to title this State of My Research Rabbit Trails video because I really want to make this brief. I really do, because I have a lot of work to do, but I'll share with you some things that are very exciting. First of all, you'll remember in the last session, I believe it would be session 6 of the birth narratives, I wanted to give you an idea of sources behind the Gospels and or at least how scholars perceive this, and how you can use that to see how writers edit and change things, and also you can begin to see by comparing the way they tell stories to the way stories were told in the Jewish scriptures, how there's that analogical bit that takes place there. But at any rate, I mentioned to you the book by James Edwards on the Hebrew Gospel and the development of the Synoptic tradition. I mentioned to you that I was comparing that particular text with Marcion's New Testament. And so I wrote to Dr. Edwards and shared with him the same thing that I shared with you yesterday. He wrote back, "Dear Michael, many thanks for writing. You have opened up a facet of the Hebrew Gospel that I had not considered before, but makes perfect sense. That is, that Marcion would omit and blunt Hebraisms in Luke. Now I want to get a hold of Debune and see how he deals with the matter. Thanks so much for your interest in my work and this intriguing suggestion, which is very welcome." So, very fun. That just tells me that I made a good connection there, and hopefully Debune now will go do all the work to prove that bit of the thesis true. And yeah, cool. All right. So as I'm wanting to bring together how and why Luke uses the birth narrative from the Hebrew Gospel for you, and I'm also considering the fact that we are now dealing with two Jewish birth narratives, the Hebrew Gospel and the Gospel of Matthew. Both birth narratives occur within Judaism, and we talked about that. But I got stuck because I was trying to sort out a kind of a series of other questions related to Luke, the text of the gospel that Marcion would have had regarding Luke, the possibility that Marcion omits chunks of text that he knows to be from the Gospel of the Hebrews because he's, again, very anti-Judaic. The wrestling with all these questions, at any rate, I ended up going back, and I'm working through the Didache as well. Not because of its birth narratives, but because I've been doing some thinking through catechetical stuff in the early church, and I'll be talking about the Didache in a moment. But I looked at Luke's Gospel, the Sermon on the Plain, chapter 6, okay? And I went to Marcion's text, because I wanted to see, well, what did Marcion do with this Sermon on the Plain, which is an early form of a catechism, right? Because at least the scholars, they go, hey, Sermon on the Plain, Sermon on the Mount, the Didache, we've got this kind of catechetical thing going. And I want to see what Marcion did with it. Well, he only omits a few verses, and we can always talk about those. Hi, Christopher. But the important thing that just jumped right out at me was, as I'm looking at these three texts, and of course Luke's bit out of chapter 6 there is a very condensed bit of about 20 verses, where Matthew has 3 chapters, And if you go on the supposition that that Luke has Matthew as well as Mark before him, and so he's cutting and pasting Matthew throughout his gospel to create an orderly account, then the question becomes, well, is there anything that's common to all these catechisms? So I thought to myself, no. I thought to myself, well, the Sermon on the Mount, has this lovely structure, and whether you go with that of Ulrich Lutz or Michael Goulder or, gosh, even Dr. Martin Lloyd-Jones, who recognizes the architectonic structure of the Sermon on the Mount, it's remarkable. This intertextuality in terms of its structure, whether it's chiastic, whether it's topical, I mean, there are many theories about this, you know, and you kind of have to work through them and how you understand the writer of Matthew and see his style, you know, and other discourses and all these things. And at any rate, I'm looking over this and I'm looking at the way Luke has just shredded this thing, right? Just and chunked it up bits and pieces, some of it throughout his gospel, and ask, okay, so now where's the stable core of the Sermon on the Mount and the Sermon on the Plain? Then I'm over at Marcion's text, and I'm looking at Marcion's text, and I'm going, huh. And then I went back to the Didache, and I've read the Didache now a couple hundred times, probably in my life or more. You know, I'd say I'm very familiar with it. And first, you know, the chronologically, what I'm going to tell you second actually happened first. But I'll get to that later. But I'm reading in chapter 1. I know this. I know all this stuff. I've been doing a lot of reading in this over the years. I'll show you some books I've been working with. And I'm reading the Didache, and I'm sitting there and I'm going, no way. There's no way. And I went back. I'm looking at the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew. I'm looking at the Sermon on the Plain in Luke. I'm looking at Marcion, and I thought, I know this language. And I went to Romans, chapters 12, 13, 14, 15, but particularly 12 through 14. I thought, oh, there it is. And I went to 1 Peter. And there it was, clear as daylight. And I thought, oh, my word. Now I've got something to work with. What I found is this. I mean, it's something that I've been saying all along, mostly because of mimetic theory. But now I think I have an exegetical basis for it. And I also have a basis that explains why the gospel is coming to existence. And it has to do with catechesis. So, where to begin? Where to begin? This is the Didache. Okay, I'm just going to read you the opening section of the Didache, the first chapter. I will omit sections that, you know, but I want you to see this. There are two ways, one of life and one of death. And there's a great difference between the two ways. The way of life is this, quote, first, you shall love the God who made you. Secondly, your neighbor is yourself. And whatsoever you would not have done to yourself, don't do to another. Now, the teaching, that is the Didache of the words, of these words is this. Now the text is going to go on to exegete. What does it mean to love the Lord your God, and what does it mean to love your neighbor as yourself? That's what he's saying. Okay, I'm going to do my exegesis. And he says, the text continues, bless those that curse you, pray for your enemies, fast for those that persecute you. For what credit is it to you if you love those that love you? Do not even the heathen do the same? But for your part, love those that hate you, and you will have no enemy. Abstain from carnal and bodily lusts. If any man smites you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also, and you will be perfect. If anyone impress thee to go with him 1 mile, go with him 2. If anyone takes your coat, give him your shirt also. If any man will take from you what is thine, refuse it not even if you can. Give to everyone that asks you. Do not refuse, for the Father's will is that we give to all from the gifts we have received. Blessed is he that gives according to the mandate, for he is innocent. Woe to him who receives. For if any man receives alms under pressure of need, he is innocent. But he who receives it without need shall be tried as to why he took and for what. And being in prison, he shall be examined as to his deeds, and he shall not come out thence until he pay the last farthing. But concerning this, it was also said, quote, let your alms sweat into your hands until you know to whom you are giving, end quote. And there's no reference for that quote. It's an unknown quote. That's chapter 1 of the Didache. Here's this. There are two ways, life and death. Boom. The way of life is love the Lord your God. What's it mean to love the Lord your God? The first thing that comes out in this exegesis is that there's no economy of exchange here. it's a reverse, it's a redemptive economy of exchange, if I can put it that way. When somebody curses you, you bless them. You don't enter into a mimetic cursing contest. You know, you bless them. You offer them a blessing. Bless those that curse you. Pray for your enemies. So when your enemies are around you, you pray for them and their benefit, and fast for those that persecute you. The Didache says that is this extraordinary now self-sacrifice on behalf. It's an atoning work. It's an atoning work. You're given that fast to understand Jewish Christianity. You're given that fast as an atonement for the persecutor. That's what you're doing. You know, they're breaking you down, and you choose to fast for them. You make your suffering an atonement for them. So a way of thinking certainly comes out of the Maccabean tradition and Second Temple Judaism. So I'm reading this. There's right at the beginning of the Didache this complete reversal about an economy of exchange, particularly in the saying, if you love those that love you, what credit is that to you? And the Greek text is, what grace is that to you? What charis? How is you giving in order to get something back a grace to you? How can God say, hey, you know, I'm going to now show grace because you gave and you got something back, so now it's my turn to add to that? No, it's not. The text is saying all the Didache, Matthew, Luke, and by the way, Marcion, and we will add Paul and Romans and First Peter to that very clearly. All they are saying in all of this, it's an amazing, it's a very simple thing, is that the follower of Jesus no longer lives in a worldly economy of exchange. The follower of Jesus does not drink from the cup of Abel. Now think about this for just a moment. Maybe when Paul's writing his letters to the Thessalonians in 41, and he's still got that kind of Second Temple Jewish eschatology thing going, and he's still kind of locked into the Peter James tradition there in Antioch, and the influence of Peter and James in the Jerusalem church and all of that. Maybe you could talk about a time when Christianity was united, maybe, even though I don't think you can, because the Johannine community already at that point has been both persecuted and then migrated over to Asia Minor in Ephesus. So there's really not one early church. And when you start adding in things like Samaritan Christianity and the churches thereof and these kinds of things, you realize the concept of the United Church anyway is a figment of imagination. But the point is, Paul makes a break. We know this. We know this break occurs in the silent years between 42 and 88, and one only has to look at, first of all, his self-understanding as an apostle. Second of all, the shift in his eschatology. Third, and you can see this really clearly in 2 Corinthians chapters 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. What I see is the influence of the Johannine community. And remember, that is a community that is anti-Peter, the Johannine community. It's anti-Peter in its orientation. And now Paul actually has somebody that can say they were there, they were historical eyewitnesses of Jesus, that is not part of this Petrine Jamesian tradition that can claim that eyewitness thing, which is so crucial to apostleship. I mean, Paul had to say, I saw Jesus my Lord on a horse, you know, the bright light and all that kind of thing. He had to, that was very important. And here Paul would meet somebody in the Johannine community who also was anti-Petrine, and I think that's what gives Paul the kind of strength, as it were, or certainly justification for then going on in the great letters that are written in from 50 to 52, Galatians, the Corinthian letters, where we know Peter has come to Corinth. Okay, and we certainly know that there are issues in Galatia with the Peter James tradition. And if Doug Campbell's correct, the $64,000 question, as he put it to me in an email when I said to him once, doesn't it make sense that the false teacher is James, Jesus' brother? And so, we look at this, we recognize that there are these different Christianities. That's when it hit me like a ton of bricks. I have too long, even in recognizing there are different Christianities, tended to think of a catechism that was kind of standard. Everybody used the same kind of catechism in the early church. How do you behave? The site, boom, boom, boom. And that's not the case. You can see that in just the little saying that I read to you: bless those that curse you, pray for your enemies, and fast for those who persecute you. When you look at the Matthean and the Lucan versions of this particular saying, gotta look it up here. I don't have the text in front of me. How did I do that? Matthew 5:44. Oh, it's because I'm I'm over here. What's the parallel to that? Luke 6:32. I'm right there. 6:32, right? Chapter 7. Oh, there it is. See, I've got it marked with my bookmark. And terrible. Okay. So what you have in Matthew is love your enemy. Agape, using agapo. Love your enemy. Excuse me. Pray for those who persecute you, whereas the Didache has fast for those that persecute you. What occurred to me, you read the Didache, and there are significant differences between Matthew's Sermon on the Mount and the Didache, the teaching, the content that's there, all of it, and the content that's in the Didache, the little document known as the Didache, 16 chapters. They both have the two-way concept, of course. So does Luke's Sermon on the Plain. But all of them, Matthew, Luke, Marcion's take on Luke, the Didache, Paul's Didache. That's what after I'm reading all this, I go back, I read Romans 12, 13, 14. I'm looking at it, and it's structured just like Didache. It's Paul's Didache. And for Christians, that's Paul's Didache, Romans 12, 13, 14, in the first part of chapter 15. That's what it is. You get his theology, then you get his Didache. You have the same setup, style, structure, and again, right there, the rejection of economies of exchange and blessing those who persecute you. But you also see it, and I would invite you to go read 1 Peter chapter 3. What's intriguing about 1 Peter chapter 3 to me is that Peter ties in these particular sayings, or not so much sayings as this catechetical tradition of blessing those who persecute you and praying for those who spitefully use you, these kinds of things. He ties them into the passion narrative of Jesus, so that Jesus is seen as the model of the one who does this, and then we follow him. That would certainly explain why the gospel tradition itself arose. The catechetical traditions all tended to orient themselves to their local situation. And I want to tell you the clue that I got that woke me up to all of this. So I'm reading the Didache, la 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 la, don't do this, don't do this, don't be an adulterer, don't be a murderer, don't be a false witness, don't do this, don't hate the man, flee from every evil, stay away from adultery, theft, lying, bada 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 boom, bam bam, all the, be meek and long suffering, don't exalt yourself, bada doon doon doon. Remember day and night, the person that speaks to you, give righteous judgment, don't be of two minds, stretch out your hand, give, because we're Pentecostal preachers here in the early church, no, but the emphasis, of course, being on the poor. Don't command in bitterness your slave or your handmaid, for who hope in the same God as you do. In other words, don't be an asshole to them because God isn't. Hate all hypocrisy, And the way of death is this. Now you get to the way of death, chapter 5. First of all, it is wicked and full of cursing, murderers, adulteries, lusts, fornications, thefts, idolatries, witchcrafts, charms, robberies, false witness, hypocrisies, a double heart, fraud, pride, malice, stubbornness, covetousness, foul speech, jealousy, impudence, haughtiness, boastfulness, persecutors of the good, haters of the truth, lovers of lies, not knowing the reward of righteousness, not cleaving to the good. Whew! That's a catalog of the way of death, isn't it, right? So now you got the way of life, love the Lord your God, don't do the economy of exchange things. And by the way, here's all the things you got to watch out for, because they're right. They're all part of as the early church would perceive it, the cosmos, the world. Then you get to chapter 6, and it's very short. It's 3 verses, and it goes like this. Now, before I tell you about chapter 6, let me just remind you, chapter 7 is where there's going to be a break for the initiate, because chapter 7 talks about baptism, and it's the one of the earliest texts we have, with, if not the earliest, that actually describes the baptismal process in the early church. And it talks about fasting, it gives the Lord's Prayer, and then the first and the earliest Eucharistic prayers that we possess. Here's the end now of the Didache process, after which, this person has experienced this for a year, 2 years, 3 years, and they've been working with a mentor and learning how to behave this way and what to avoid, and and this whole thing is memorized. You get to chapter 6. See that no one make you to err from this way of the teaching, for he teaches you without God. For if you can bear the whole yoke of the Lord, you will be perfect. But if you cannot, do what you can. And concerning food, bear what you can, but keep strictly from that which is offered to idols, for it is the worship of dead gods. Stay away from food offered to idols. It's the worship of dead gods. End of story. It's a command. It's right there. And that triggered, I went bang. That's it. This is Corinth. This is Rome. This is Antioch. This tells me something. That little sentence tells me something. It tells me that this document comes out of an environment where it has already been decided against Paul and Paul's way of thinking about food offered to idols. It has now been decided that food offered to idols, eating food offered to idols, is tantamount to committing idolatry. And thus you have the Jamesian position now modified in the book of Acts. In Acts 15. Do you understand what I'm saying here? Which leads me to think that the Didache and Matthew may reflect the two sides of the Jerusalem church tradition. Matthew's reflecting the Petrine side, the Didache, the Jamesian side of things, which would mean that in theory we could use the Didache to also help reconstruct the false teacher. Now it is interesting, and you have to check out this phenomenon because I don't know how to explain it. The one book of the New Testament, outside of the Sermon on the Mount, which becomes the Sermon on the Plain in Luke 6, the one book of the New Testament that has more allusions back to Matthew 5, 6, and 7, the Sermon on the Mount, is the Epistle to James. Oddly enough, the economy of exchange issue, that is, do good to those who hate you, pray for your enemies, bless those that persecute, all that stuff, that's not found in James. And I wonder why. It's found in 1 Peter, found in Matthew, found in Luke, found in Paul, but not found in James. That's a question for somebody. Anyway, so I'm working through the Didache, and I see this, and it really strikes me. When the early church came to terms with the fact that Jesus was the Lord, exalted to the right hand of the Father, and had sent the Spirit, and they began asking about who they were in relation to him, one piece of the tradition tends to push itself to the forefront more than any other. Love your enemy. Love those that don't love you. Pray for those that persecute you. Bless those who curse you. All this non-economy of exchange. The world would just expect a mimetic aggression to increase. Here, negative only brings out good. The early church contexted this two ways. One, in the actual life of Jesus when they produced gospels around his life. And as I've mentioned before throughout the birth narrative series and other videos, the theme of rejection looms large throughout the entirety of the New Testament. And it should not surprise us that much of Christianity has rejected this gospel as well. It's a very difficult thing to follow the Lord, to let go of all economies of exchange. It truly, truly is. But they all place it in the context also of our suffering. Paul certainly does in his Didache of Romans 12 through 14, particularly in chapter 13. First Peter absolutely does this. And if Selwyn is correct, that First Peter's a baptismal letter, it would make sense to have this catechetical bit embedded in that letter as a baptismal letter, and bang, you've got an early Jewish Christian liturgical document with catechetical tradition tied to the passion, the life of Jesus. That is, Jesus' life becomes necessary to be told because we need a model to follow. Prior to that, all these catechisms that would have floated around in the early church, do this, don't do this, here's these behaviors, here's that, they become tied. All of them become tied because they're coming out of Jewish Christianity. That's where the two ways tradition is in Judaism. And the two ways tradition, the way of life, way of death, it comes out of wisdom tradition, okay? And it's Jewish. And there's a later book in the Talmud, the Derech Eresh, which is this two ways tradition. You see it in the rabbis as well. You see it in other literature as well, in Qumran, and you see it also in apocalyptic. But you do see it in Jesus' teaching, and you do see it in the New Testament. There's two ways. But at the heart of the Christian true way is letting go of economies of exchange. It's embedded there, right at the heart of all these catechetical pieces. That's the thing that just astonished me. Why didn't the Didache survive? Because Jewish Christianity didn't survive. It was already fragmented and fragmenting during the period of the early church from 33 until the destruction of Jerusalem in 70. Certainly, remembering, of course, the 120s would be the run-up to the Bar Kokhba revolution there. And of course, Marcion is big time now at this point in his teaching. He's got influence. He's got power. He's establishing churches. He's getting a reputation. And he's this whole looming thing now. Marcion is just separating Christianity from the Jewish people, and in the 110s, the 120s, the say 100 to 130, even 90 to 130 if you want, but I think that's a little bit early. Nevertheless, then you've got this kind of second destruction of Jerusalem by Hadrian in 135. Bam! Now every Gentile has reason to follow Marcion, man. That there's this, but the early church rightly said, no, we can't do that. The church and Israel belong together. And they did their best to create a seam between the two. They really did. And we can talk about, and I've talked about previously, some of the errors they made in trying to bridge that. But I'm just wanting to throw this stuff out there as to tell you what I'm thinking. Here's some books that have been helpful to me, of course. In the Apostolic Fathers, this is my Kirsop Lake edition. I carry it around because it's tiny. It fits in my pocket. Is the Didache in the Greek text, in the English text as well. I use 4 commentaries on the Didache. I have this one. Oh, this is a Catholic commentary. Catholics are always good in patristics. James Kleist in this. I have Van Zandt and David Flusser, the Jewish Scholar's Commentary on the Didache. I have the big Hermeneia commentary on the Didache, excellent, by Kurt Niederwimmer. And then the 1,000-page commentary, yes, a 1,000-page commentary on the Didache by Aaron Milovich, whose thesis I absolutely appreciate, but who I think misses the essential point. Good work, though. I mean, really, really good work otherwise. Okay, so yeah, there's some things for today. I've obviously got more work to do here, and I will return back to the birth narratives perhaps in a couple of days. I would like to kind of continue this rabbit trail here for a few days and see where it leads, and look forward to hearing back from Dr. James Edwards as to whether or not the insight I had with regard to Marcion and the Hebrew Gospel is correct. Because if in fact he says, you know what, you're absolutely right, this means something, I'll tell you what it means. Think about this for a moment. Let's say Luke is a rewrite of Matthew to, you know, make the Jesus story in a more Pauline frame. Okay, and that's fine. And let's say that Luke's, the gospel is perhaps written 85, 90, it doesn't really matter, right? If Joseph Tyson is correct, that Acts is written later, around 120, and that it's written against Marcion, and then there are several writers on the pastoral letters who note that there are what look to be very explicit critiques of Marcionism in the pastoral, so they would be written around the same time. By the way, so would 2 Peter, which, because of its atticisms, which refers to the problem of Paul's letters, you know, how people confuse them. We would then, if we put this together, what we have is we have Luke is perhaps 20 years older than Marcion. Marcion, who chooses Luke's gospel. Think about this. The guy who says, you know, we're going to disconnect, I'm a radical Paulinist, and I want to use the most Pauline gospel I got, so I'm going to use Luke. And he carves out all of the stuff in the Hebrew gospel, or most of it, except for the parables. It's interesting to me that he seemed to leave the parables alone. It would mean, A, that Marcion would have known the Hebrew gospel. 2, he would have known where Luke had used the Hebrew gospel as a source in his text, and 3, intentionally redacted it out, which would then serve as a proof of Edwards' thesis that Luke indeed did have the Hebrew gospel in front of him, but it would serve as further proof precisely of what Marcion was doing with regard to de-Judaizing his text. See what I'm saying? So that's the exciting piece of all this. I know some of you are probably rolling your eyeballs at me going, dear God, Michael, go have another cup of coffee or hit of acid. That's the stuff that thrills you. But it's so fun because it helps us to reconstruct the early church, to see how they thought, and ultimately, you know, to be able to follow them. Because listen, the one thing that the Catechism teaches you is this: how to suffer. The Catechism of Jesus and the Gospels are not given to us to eliminate suffering. This is the falsehood of the sky god religion of Jesus, the false god. Life is suffering. All creation suffers. It's about learning how to suffer. I mean, even the Buddhist knows this. The Native American shaman. You cannot stop suffering. You can learn how to redeem it. That's what the early Christians understood. That's how they could bless those that persecuted them, love their enemies. Yeah, at least try to. As the Didache says, if you can bear the whole yoke of the Lord, you'll be perfect. But if you can, just do whatever you can. I like that. I really like that. I thought that was pretty good. You know, nice of you guys to put in there. You know, just do what you can. That'll work. All right, man. So there's just some fun for today. Let you know what I'm doing, researching. Thanks again for everything. Hope you enjoy these little talks. Cheers.